use you for to lead into a discussion. Has anyone here, Patrick talked about, do I have to use this? Can you hear me?
Yeah, they might need it for the recording if they're recording the session.
All right. So, has anyone dealt with a journal that has been has an impact factor that's been suppressed because of stacking or self-citation? No one's had to. I'm the only ugly duckling in the room that's had to deal. Yeah. So that's a good way to talk about it, because the issue that Patrick talked about with the stacking of management decision happened both before he and I came onto the journal. So I'm not shy. I'm not shy, precious about talking about any of the issues involved. So the way I'd like for you to talk about the way it was dealt with your journal, but with ours, what happened was TR informed us that the journal was going to be suppressed because of the stacking situation. There were actually 4 journals involved in the stacking. Was it 3 or 4? I think it was 4. And so we immediately, we cleared out the entire editorial advisory board and fired all of the editors of the journal, and then brought Patrick on board, who then built up quite a hefty editorial board. It's been successful. The submissions, the impact factor, I don't think is where you want it to be. It's not where it was even prior to the suppression, but I'm confident it's going to get that way in the right way. So I feel like it was dealt with appropriately in that regard. There are some things, how do you feel, that there are some things that should or could have done differently?
No, I thought it was handled really well. I mean, it was basically a cut the head off the snake kind of thing, and just get it done. We had another issue where we had to remove an editor at a journal of ours, of Emerald's, and it was a similar type of thing. I just think bold and quick action is important because, again, people in academia talk a lot and share a lot of information. It's an incredibly efficient rumor mill, a kind of informal information sharing network. And if your journal gets a bad reputation, a lot of these individuals, like professors who go to conferences every year, they see a lot of people who they only talk to once per year, and that's going to be the conversation that year. And then the people they told about that journal having that problem, the people who receive that information know that, and they think about it for a whole year, and then they come back to the conference. And so it's sort of the cycle is structured to make a reputation stick, and I think the bold action is vital in a case like that. I'm trying to think. Yeah, we had another editor who started to.
Was the peer review was compromised? Is that the one you're talking about?
No, we had an editor who started to get really difficult to deal with, and they removed that editor, and then I was interim editor of a journal for a while, and I don't know. It was just. I don't know if I should mention. They're probably going to figure it out now because they're going to look at my CV. Okay, Journal of Management History.
Oh yeah, that was a peer review problem, wasn't it? Okay. All right, you're not going to talk about it. All right. So what I will ask though, one thing that I think I would have done differently if I had been managing the journal at the time, if I remember correctly, you weren't aware of the suppression when you came on as editor?
I think they told me.
Okay.
I can't recall. I knew there was a problem, and then I can't remember if I knew it was going to be suppressed when I joined or not, but it didn't surprise me.
No, it had already been suppressed when you joined.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
I mean, it was a turnaround situation.
Yeah. All right. Good. Do you have anything you want to add about how you dealt with yours?
So this journal was given to me right when it got the impact factor back, so it had been suppressed, I think, for 2 years. And it's my understanding that it was actually less malicious. We didn't fire the editor or replace anybody. It was actually a lack of communication on our part to explain what citation stacking was. The editor he edits 2 journals that are pretty niche, go hand in hand, and so authors were citing the journals over and over again, and he wasn't aware that it was a problem. So now we've had lengthy conversations with him about it and how to keep an eye out for it. He wasn't encouraging it. So now every year we meet him annually and we talk about, let's look at the self-citation rate for this year. It's pretty low. So it was kind of a less, I guess, scary conversation. It was actually more about lack of communication. So that's basically it. Yeah.
Ours, which was actually on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing. Yeah. Anybody else want to talk about it? As stacking or self-citation? All right. Yeah.
What's the proper self-citation rate?
That you should be looking at because we've had that issue as well, and you need to be looking at the journals that are in the cited journal and the citing journal, and see what their self-cite rate is, and make sure your journal is within that range. You can't compare a general management journal like Management Decision and its self-cite rate to a specialty journal like the International Journal of Entrepreneurial Research, because there is going to be higher the smaller the community of self-cite. Anyone else want to say something about that? So looking at the cited and citing will give you an idea of what the self-cite rate should be. Anything else? Yep.
Was a public statement made whenever this came out to help address the rumors or kind of like get ahead of it, so to say? Like an editorial or a press release or like the editors were removed and
Yeah.
this new plan in place?
Yeah. We didn't do, as far as I can recall, because I wasn't I was with the company at the time, but I wasn't the manager of the journals. We did not do a press release announcing what had happened. However, it was right before Academy of Management, which is a real big, it's the big conference for the year, and we all had our what do we do when people ask about this? What are we going to say? And we had the whole point. So we didn't. When people asked, we told them straight up what had happened and what we had done in response, but we weren't proactive in telling people what had happened. It was only suppressed for 1 year. We were very proactive with Thomson Reuters to communicating with them. So it ended up only being suppressed 1 year, which we thought was a victory.
I actually think that's the right approach too. I don't think a press release would be a good idea. I think just handling it internally and being prepared to answer it, because you don't know what people are going to do with that, right? I mean, you want to be open and transparent, fix the problem, but you don't want to broadcast it necessarily either.
Yeah, so I'm Gunter Eisbach from JMA Publications, and I'm both a publisher, but I'm also an academic. And so I was interested in when you said like a large editorial board doesn't come at a cost for the journal. I think there are also different schools of thought, and it also depends on what the role of the editorial board members exactly is. And I think there's a huge variety in terms of what the role of an EB member is. It sounds like in your journal they're not actually doing a lot of work. Maybe you can talk a little bit more to that. But in our model, like each EB member is actually also entitled to actually take on a paper information and guidance through the submission. So they're also at the same time kind of associate editors. That means they have to be trained, and to a certain degree they also represent the journal. And recruiting them is actually, like at least in our field, not a trivial task to pick the right EB members, especially because we are open access. And the other issue is like, how do you recruit these EB members? And you can also answer this question, how you actually go about it, because I'm worried about a negative impact on the journal reputation, because predatory journals are known for like spamming email. It's like as a professor, I get an email every week inviting me on be on the evening EB of some journal I never heard of. Sometimes not even in my own discipline. Right? So you can't really do this kind of mass emailing approach. So I wonder how did you actually recruit this large EB, and how did you said you're not actually very selective, but I'm also concerned that especially in certain regions of the world we're getting applications from academics who send ECB and this like they're EB member of 20 journals and seem to be very important for the ECB, but then I'm getting concerned about the quality and also like tarnishing the reputation of the journal.
How many like papers per year do you receive?
2,500 across our.
The one journal with the small editorial board gets 2,500 papers per year?
Well, we have a number of sister journals, but most submissions are just our flagship journal, and then we kind of hesitated to.
Okay, so I can't imagine like if you have one journal that gets 2,500 submissions per year that, I don't know, for us, I can just speak out of my own experience. We have too many submissions and it's rising too quickly to be really selective with the editorial board. We had a lot of reviewers or editorial board members complaining about the workload. They were getting too many assignments. And as I mentioned, it's a thankless job. And so we needed to just raise the number, and we didn't have time to interview a lot of them. It wouldn't have worked. So the way I needed to raise the number on the board. And I don't know, I'm trying to wrap my head around how that would tarnish the reputation of the journal. I don't know if, I mean, we're open to everybody to join our board. If they're a good reviewer, where they're from or what they're doing, it doesn't matter to us. So that's not an issue for us. And how did I recruit them? I had just stepped, this actually may be, yeah, it's a good question. Look for editors, I should say, that have been in other leadership positions. So as I mentioned, I was chair of a division in the Academy of Management, the group Patty just mentioned, which gave me huge entree and huge visibility to a large number of scholars, all of whom would be well suited to join our board. And so I just went back to that list and different group emails and so forth, and I said, hey, we're restructuring and pivoting management decision. Anybody who'd be interested, send us a note. And we, you know, I think we did say attach your CV or show us your background or include your university faculty page so we could actually look at something, but we weren't making decisions. I don't think we ever rejected anybody who wanted to join our board. But so it's a capacity issue. We just had too many papers coming in too quickly, and so we couldn't afford to be selective. And like I mentioned, there was a little bit of a, I could feel a little bit of a position from the publisher where we wanted to be careful about who we were putting on the board, but it's my opinion that it's a non-issue. I think a lot of people can be good reviewers.
So can your EB members actually take on papers to guide them through the submission process, or is that a role that's reserved for the associate editor?
The latter. The associate editors do that.
So what do the EB members actually do?
They receive invitations to review.
Oh, they're reviewed.
Yeah, and they accept or decline and then turn them around. Yes, ma'am?
I think that answers my question. I think there was some confusion about terms when about editorial board members. They have a different role. Actually, I run 3 journals, so they have different roles at each one of those journals. But when I think about editorial board, I don't think about decision-making ability. So, but it sounds like they're more like reviewers that are a set group of reviewers that you
You know, that's come up with us too, because I've heard Emerald call the reviewers the editorial advisory board. And here, in my field at least, we just call them board members. I'm on the board of that journal. That means you review and you're named on the website as a reviewer. You don't have to be an associate editor or anything like that. You're on the board. You're on the editorial board, and that's it. But Emerald would call it the editorial advisory board. And then they wanted us to have like a senior, you remember a senior editorial advisory board.
I didn't want that.
I know you didn't want it, but her predecessor did, and I wasn't hip to it, to be honest with you. I didn't think it was like adding a level of structure that I didn't think we need. I like a really flat, adaptable organization.
It's on.
Hi, just to add a couple of thoughts based on how the discussion is developing, I think it's really worth considering what works for your journal or journals in the fields that they are in, because we've had considerations and we've actually managed to transition away from, for one of the journals that I oversee, the model that you've described, Patrick, purely because we realized that if it's a very broad biochemistry journal, and we realized that if we were to rely just on a specific group called the editorial board, who were the trusted reviewers for that journal, we felt that was very limiting, because our associate editors were then not able to pick the 2 best independent reviewers to review that paper, given the subject matter. So we moved away. So it's a very discipline-specific thing, I think, which is why it's about looking at what works for your journal. And in our case, we decided to make the transition with the editor-in-chief, with the board, and for the group that were current at that time, for the group who were the trusted group of reviewers called the editorial board. That was difficult messaging for us to say. I mean, we didn't put it in these terms, but basically we had to transition away from them being the group of trusted reviewers, and we gave them more of a role on giving us concepts and ideas around commissioning and soliciting for the journal, and said, if you're on the board, we want you to contribute to the strategy for the journal and feed up to your associate editors ideas about where the journal should have a poster prize, ideas about where we should be commissioning, and these sorts of things. In the meanwhile, please know that associate editors will be turning to the 2 best independent reviewers they can find for a subject. Sometimes that may be some of you, sometimes it may not. And so that's a transition we managed away from one model to another. And I think it's worth knowing there isn't a rule book as such, and it's about what works between the conversations you as the publisher have with your editor-in-chief and your editorial board, and what's right for the discipline.
Excuse me, did you want to talk about you have 3 journals, all with 3 different types of editorial boards? Do you want to speak a minute?
Right, they each have a little bit different structure. So I manage 3 economics journals. The biggest journal has a series of 6 editors. They have decision-making authority. When I first started at the journal, they had to have kind of a second each other's accept decisions. At this point, they're making decisions independently. And that journal does have associate editors. The associate editors are tied to the main editors. So they each have 2 or 3 associate editors, and they view those people as kind of superior reviewers, for lack of a better term. So they go to those people and say, I'm thinking about sending this paper out for review, but I'm not really sure. This is kind of out of my wheelhouse. What do you think? And then we have reviewers that are kind of a broad span of people. So basically anyone the editor thinks would be good to review a paper. So that's the first journal. The second journal has more of an editor-in-chief structure. So it's an editor-in-chief, the associate editors. The editor-in-chief in that journal has the authority to make decisions. For the third journal, we have associate editors, and the associate editors are relied on more for decision making, and then the editor-in-chief just kind of rubber stamps those. And the editorial boards for those are kind of different as well. So we consider the editors the editorial board for the big journal. For the smaller journals, they have editorial boards, but they're basically like figureheads on the masthead, the big names, people who support the journal but don't necessarily do work for the journal. And for all of the journals, we have, the reviewer system is basically the same. So it's It's anybody within the field who has knowledge in a specific area.
Yep.
And then through the publication of one
If you want to say your name and what company you work for and what you do, that would be
Right. I'm Rebecca. I work for Emerald. I'm also a publisher. Just talking about the different forms that editorial boards take, I'm wondering if anyone has any input. How do you identify what form is best for the journal? I know it's a discussion that has to happen with an editor, but there's no chart or anything to go off of that describes what fits best for each journal, and when do you identify when you do need a restructure? I think that's an interesting conversation to have.
Anybody want to? She can hear my views on that all day long. So anybody else want to talk about? We'll let Malavika. Oh, she's got her.
Sorry. I think the first thing to say is, if it isn't broken, so look at what the workflow is. Look at if there are pressure points. Look at if there are issues. So because that will often be a sign. There will often be telltale signs, whether those are pressure points, whether those might be in some cases even potentially ethical issues. So in the example I was describing, one of the problems we had with the previous format was that the trusted group of reviewers who were formerly the editorial board would, because they were seen as this trusted group, it transpired they weren't actually doing a very rigorous job of reviewing. And we had to go through an audit process and look at what was actually happening because there were signs of papers not doing so well and things like this. And so we had to delve deeper into what was actually going on. So we looked at the workflow, and there were some concerns. It wasn't rife and it wasn't across the whole board, but to take a phrase that you use, Patrick, there are many different birds, and so different people had different approaches and took different things from being given that authority to say, oh, papers have to pass through just this ring of people. So look for the signs, and if things are working smoothly, then don't look to necessarily change for change's sake. But also the other point I'd make is look at other models, especially where you've got colleagues you can speak with or a large publisher that has other portfolios, even in other fields, because you can learn new ideas and interesting things from looking at how somebody in a different field runs their workflow, and then sort of evaluate the benefits and the downsides from doing it that way. So that would be my other piece of advice.
All right.
It's a really great question for a management professor, actually, because so structure and strategy and culture are the elements that we really think a lot about when we research organizations. And we say structure follows strategy. That's like a term we use. Structure follows strategy. So depending on what the strategy is for the journal, that will have a large influence on what would be the best structure. So for example, if you want to increase turnaround time, or if you want to increase, I don't know, submissions or efficiencies, or versus that, if you want to increase quality, that might take a different sort of, typically we tend to structure things more, so there's more sign-offs, more red tape when we want to increase quality, oftentimes, to make sure that it's as good as it possibly can be. But if we're increasing efficiency, we have less of that, so it's faster. So I think it depends on, forget about the structure, just think about what you really want to achieve and what it looks like, and then start to build your structure. So structure follows strategy is the way that I think about a question like that. I actually had a question for the room. What are your views about using social media to promote your journals? So one of the things we did was we created a Twitter account, and the way our editorial assistants use it is that I have them post 2 or 3 tweets per week but they are to go in and look at all of our content and find a really interesting paper. It doesn't matter if it was a few years ago or do the last issue, and then take a quote from the paper, and they often find an image. And it'll be something like who are the best people in sales jobs in 2 different countries, or do the jerkiest people at work make the best leaders or not, or like you hear about the no asshole rule by that guy. Sorry about my harsh language, but little things like that might grab attention and then we try to get people, and I don't know, it's grown a little bit, and I like the idea of it. It hasn't been as great as I've hoped, but it never is. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about any best practices or examples of that.
I've got a question.
You have a question, or?
Yeah, question for you.
Oh, okay.
Daniel Hurley, Sage Publishing. I'm wondering what your view is on altmetrics as a measure that is for the quality of a journal. So that is social mentions of a journal article compared to something like impact factor with like a citation. So what's the value of someone just putting something up on social media as opposed to constructing an argument of their own in their own article and then citing somebody else's work? How do they compare in your mind?
That's a great question. There's another technological tool. I'm blanking on the name of it, but it tracks that. I don't know, maybe somebody knows what it is, but Plum Metrics may be the one, yeah. And they track that sort of thing, and I think that's where things are headed, to be honest with you. I think that's where things are headed, and it's getting more and more important, but it's not there yet.
So the idea of immediacy as well, so the amount of time you need to put together a structured article versus the immediacy of like a quick comment on social media.
The wheels of academia turn really slowly. In the publishing world, it's different, but for the professors who are working toward promotion and tenure and need this currency for their cases, it just takes a long time. And so I think as a result of that, it doesn't always translate into the academic realm. And at the same time, there's a lot of traditions embedded in there. Like my colleagues, not just at my university, but my colleagues in the field, especially the ones who are more mature and who have been around a while, would be pretty much against using the kind of metrics and social media things to justify the quality of an article. But some of the newer, maybe I might even say more progressive scholars might look at that. I would look at that because I know it means there are eyeballs reading that paper, and I can measure that, and to me that's impact. But I think the overall trend, the arc of the development in the field is more toward using those types of things. And you guys are probably ahead of academia. We're probably lagging far behind you. But I don't know, give it 20 years and it might be acceptable. I don't know if that's depressing or what, but I would say it'll take 20 years before people would count social media mentions as an acceptable form of quality.
So can I just comment on this? So I actually did some research in this area, and in 2012 I published a paper entitled "Can Tweets Predict Citations?" So what we did was we monitored the number of tweets to our articles, and 2 years later we looked at like how often these papers are cited, and then we tried to correlate the number of citations, or more accurately the percentile, with the number of citations. And we found that within the first week of publishing, if you look at the number of tweets, you can predict if this is going to be a highly cited paper, because the top 20% highly tweeted papers also often turned out to be the top 20% highly cited papers. So this paper was widely discussed, even in the scholarly kitchen. Phil Davis wrote a blog about it. He basically said, yeah, this is interesting, but we're not sure if this is generalizable across other journals, because our journals admittingly deal with health technology So these people who are in the field of technology are also more likely to use Twitter and using social media. So we don't know if these results hold up for other journals, and I invite everybody to do some similar analysis for their discipline. But this paper is widely regarded as one of the seminal papers for autometrics because it shows that there is some sort of correlation between like how often a paper is cited in social media and the more traditional measures of impact. There's not 100% correlation, and of course we don't want that because we are looking at different things. We're looking at social impact versus impact in academia. So I wouldn't expect 100% correlation, but it is interesting that there is some sort of interaction because
it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Did you control for the reputation of the journal in which those papers were appearing?
well,
Forget about the article.
We
just
looked
the
at
journal
only
itself.
one journal, like within one
Okay,
journal.
so
right?
so you did. Okay,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. That's really cool.
I have a question for you. Did you take into account geography from where the tweets were coming? The place where I'm going is I manage, by the way, I'm Sai Konda from the American Chemical Society. I'm a senior managing editor overlooking the materials portfolio. And Twitter is actually blocked in China. And the output from China has actually overtaken US in the total number of published articles. And material science is a very hot area in that particular country. So I was just wondering if adding another dimension of geography to social media and citations may be an important parameter to look at.
Yeah, but I mean, so this analysis was done in 2012, or actually it was published in 2012, so the analysis was actually done in the 3 previous years. So when Twitter wasn't as big as it is now, so the number of tweets was not that large. And it's also important to know that we didn't do a kind of a linear, we didn't try to do a linear correlation, right? So I think if you try to do a linear correlation, then the correlation is very poor. And many people who have tried to replicate this research have made the mistake of looking at the linear correlation. But what we did is basically we dichotomized. So we looked at the papers which were like the top 20% highly tweeted papers, and those are much more likely, so they have a very high odds ratio of being also the top cited paper. So there's this kind of dichotomized correlation which you can find, but it's not a linear correlation. But back to your question, no, we didn't look at geography because back then the number of tweets was just not that high.
I think somebody needs to redo that research with a bigger sample and also seeing if accounting for Twitter posts that say this article is complete bogus, that would be a lot of tweets. And then, that's not going to correlate, or does it, to cited? Yeah.
We monitor our Twitter and the tweets quite closely, so it's mostly like the positive, like retweeting when something sounds interesting. And I'm also pretty sure that most of the people who tweet or retweet and actually read the paper. And it's just
Oh, yeah.
the article title sounds interesting, and I think this is the main predictive factor also maybe for which drives citations, because in academia I'm not sure how many people are actually also reading the paper or just cite something because the article title sounds interesting, right?
Yeah.
And I also think that in the age of social media, we all have to rethink how we do our article titles, and I'm rethinking if we should migrate away from the very academic and dry article titles which we are using, which is intervention in condition : method. Right, this is our article format, but I think in the age of social media, where we actually also automatically tweet, we send out automatic tweets whenever something is published. Maybe we need to use more catchy article titles.
That's really interesting. Get away from the speaker here. I probably decision about 20 papers a week-ish, and I play this little game with myself. When I see the paper come across, I see the title, and I often try to predict what the associate editor recommended just based on the title. And it's pretty reliable. I can tell by the title generally if it was received well or not before I even get into the paper. So there's something there, and I'd be really interested because you guys see you know, a lot of the metrics and the impact, and he just had an opinion about the titles. But could you share anything about what are good titles and what are bad titles? Because that would be of great interest to me, actually, because I can tell the authors, like my publisher told me, we don't like that title when I did my book.
So I'm not sure if it's as much about titles. I'm sure other people can contribute to this. But when you're talking about titles in relation to social media, especially Twitter, we have that 240 character limit. And I think the goal with social media is to kind of start a discussion, right? It's not just people clicking on the article or downloading it, but it's what you're hoping for as a publisher and as an academic is that people start buzzing or talking about this, whether it be, you know, in Twitter or as comments on Facebook, and that's how it'll gain traction. So I think not necessarily the length, but how quickly it gets to the point and to the heart.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll come to you. We just published a paper last week. I accepted it, and this is one of the ones. I saw the title, and I said, I bet that's going to get in. And it started out, Sleeping with the Enemy, which was a movie or a book, right? And I was like, that sounds interesting. And sure enough, it got in. I don't know. I just think this is very interesting, and I would like to hear your thoughts.
I don't have anything on titles exactly, but, I'm Tony. I'm Gunnison. I'm with University of Wisconsin Press. We publish, amongst other journals, the Journal of Human Resources. It's a microeconomics journal. And we have somebody, a managing editor for the journal who spent the last year working very aggressively on writing a layperson's summary of the article and putting it up on Facebook. And I'm actually a little bit of a skeptic of that. I don't see how the audience is going to see. I don't think the audience is there on Facebook. However, we're seeing more tweets and we're seeing more citations and news sources come up. And it's only been a year, so I don't have anything really definitive to say about it, but it looks promising, even though I was a skeptic.
I'm Jim Downing. I'm with the University of California's Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and we publish one journal and a lot of books about agriculture. We're different from UC Press. And one way that we're thinking about this sort of what you do in terms of layperson summaries of articles, it seems like the important thing is to get the academic, the expert itself, expert him or herself, involved in the discussion as the expert. Like, that's the person who needs to be engaging on Twitter, because it's their colleagues. So we found that when our media people write like a press release type thing about an article, it doesn't, it seldom gets traction. But when you are able to poke an expert in that field who will then say, hey, this is the best paper or the best review of in research on climate change effects on agriculture in California, then it gets, a big bunch of traction.
There's actually been research on that too, like companies that tweet, whether they have a firm doing it for them versus an employee who actually knows the company. And the latter has more authenticity, and it tends to have more impact out there when it's posted. People respond to it better. I think that's a good point.
My name is Victoria. I'm from Jamier Publications. I think another important thing to think about with lay summaries is that can expand your audience beyond just an academic circle, and this could also help through with social media reach, tweets. But I think a lay summary, you can't necessarily think of it just its use on Twitter, but also how many people will visit your site as well and access other publications if they know they can access your journal and access lay summaries that they can quickly decipher, quickly understand. They might be more likely in the future to access your journal specifically to read more articles. And I think it's important for the dissemination of accurate knowledge in other press releases written by other companies who often might misinterpret an academic article. So it can be used by so many different sources and so many audiences to make sure accurate information is portrayed.
So So you said that when the lay article comes from the academic person, it gets retweeted or down or whatever more? Is that what you're saying?
I was talking about it's not so much the lay article, it's that when the author of the article and other academics are engaging in a conversation, I think that journalists these days are looking for genuine conversations on Twitter, and they say, oh, here's a community of people that is getting excited about this paper. That probably means that this is an important paper, and that there is sort of, it's like genuine buzz versus something that we as publishers are pushing out.
Yeah, Sai?
Yeah, in my experience in the journals that I run, I've actually seen that if the editor-in-chief is active on social media and sharing papers, those get downloaded the most in a period of time, and that actually generates a conversation.
Right, because
so
that person is really, they have become their own personality, right?
Exactly, exactly. So they're either tweeting on behalf of their lab, or they're tweeting on behalf of the journal. We give them control of the journal's Twitter account, and we make a note that this is coming from the editor-in-chief and not from a journal staff member. It actually gets more visibility.
And you were saying with lay people and misinterpretate in a sentence, what, sum it up?
Having the author and people from the journal summarize the paper in a short summary, that will help lay people get to the accurate point rather than them trying to interpret things themselves.
Okay. So, anybody here from Harvard Business Review? So, when they all of those articles are written by the scholar, but they're actually rewritten by a staff person at HBR. So we've got a panel tomorrow afternoon at 3:45 on real world impact, and so Emerald did some research on the gap between the business scholars and practitioners, and found that 60% of the business scholars thinks it's important that practitioners understand that. I mean, they all do, but 60% said that practitioners need to learn academic language in order to understand their articles, and 60% of the practitioners said that scholars need to write in a more accessible way. So the gap is not just in research, what is being researched, but what's being communicated and how it's being communicated. So anyway, that's tomorrow. We've got, anybody else want to add anything to the conversation? Yep, in the back.
I just wanted to tie something to the social sharing and titles.
Yep.
I'm Matt Weingarten with the American Marketing Association. We publish 4 marketing journals, and our Journal of Marketing just had an editor transition. The editor asked me, you do all these lay articles, and I see all these great social sharing. Does it actually do people read the full articles? And what we found is that we have really great sharing with a number of the articles where we do a wonderful job of putting great spin on the article. When they click through Twitter or LinkedIn in particular, and they see a super dense title, it seems to me they stop reading it immediately. So all of our great effort, crappy title translates to they ain't going in. And I think that's the marketing word on the subject.
Yeah. So is that a problem, though, that they don't read the article? Is it?
Well, I think in our mind, we'd like them to be able to be exposed to the breadth of the research that's been created, right? I mean, we don't want them to end on just like the shiny bullet points that we put forward through our 242 characters.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
What might be the objective of having lay people click in on these academic articles and publications?
What might be the way?
Objective.
Of having
The lay people click on the articles. Like, what is your desired outcome?
Yeah.
I can take it together.
That might be able to answer that question and connect the two.
So speaking as going back in time as a graduate student doing my PhD, it's not necessary that I know everything in my narrow discipline of research. Actually, reading these layman articles saves me some time, and at the same time getting an idea of what the paper is actually talking about. It makes me read more volume of papers without having to really dig deep into the details and scratching my head and trying to figure out on my own as to what the article is talking about.
And just to add a different flavor to that perspective, at least from the science realm, so I can't speak to other disciplines, but in the scientific realm, there is the beginnings of beyond open access, also the open science side of things. And open science has, I mean, that's a whole other session, so I won't go into even trying to define all its pillars, but there is an element of citizen science in there and engaging, you know, people who aren't necessarily scholars themselves, but sort of the public engagement angle and the surfacing to them to spark innovation, to spark different thinking. And I think that potentially, I don't know exactly, and I don't think most people talking about open science do at the moment because it's early days yet, but I think potentially lay summaries have some kind of a role there as well.
Hi, I'm Matt with KW Consulting. To give sort of the opposite voice, a bit of dissent, I was actually working with a client last summer, and they had to start steering their authors back towards more traditional descriptive titles because their authors had really started trying to get very clever in there. And as you would read through the table of contents, like a lot of people do when they get it by email or something, readers weren't really understanding what each article was about because the authors had gone too far astray in that. And it was, so I think you have to think about both purposes. Yes, for social media, catchy titles are interesting. That's what's going to catch people's eye. But then you also have, you don't want to disassociate your actual researchers in there, making sure that their workflow, when they're getting alerts about an article or about the new issue coming through, you want to make sure you're drawing them in as well. They're your core audience.
Do you get to a situation where you have a snappy, short title and then a detailed subtitle with all the keywords or like machine read or search engines or people looking at the table of contents that want the detail of in-depth scientific research where that's important?
Well, I think one way to do it might be actually like reviving a very old school way where you had authors submit kind of their full title and then a running title that journals would sometimes print in like the header or the footer so that you'd have that running along, but a short title. So if authors want to be clever or you want to have a journal kind of write that short title, something that's along with that, that could be one option.
I'm Nicole, also with Jamer Publications. Just speaking about lay summaries a little bit, as of last year, we're now the publisher of the Journal of Participatory Medicine. So this might be a little more specific for science journals, but we're working on like patient-driven innovation and patient-focused stuff, and maybe also incorporating like a different class of like patient-specific reviewers. So these types of lay summaries can be really, really useful for people who are interested in being more participatory in their own health, that an academic geared title or a proper academic abstract may not be quite as accessible.
Yeah, I think we find that in the applied, like business management, we want to reach practitioners ultimately. So anybody else? Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm with Springer Publishing. A lot of the journals we publish are in nursing, and we found that we use lay articles to help increase knowledge to the general public of what nurses do, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And we've found we have a website called dailynurse.com that I help manage, and we publish lay articles there. I try to invite our editors and authors to write for us blog posts about something, and then we'll link back to the article. We found we've had pretty good success with that. Of course, getting the authors to actually write those is a challenge still.
Yeah, yeah. That's getting the authors to write them. That's right.
I think another, to look at you asked about like the objective or the benefits. I think if you want to look at it from an author's point of view as well, I know in the UK they have a new agenda called the Responsible Research and Innovation Agenda or Guidelines, and it helps if you have more transparent, open, ethical research planned, and that includes the publication, you are more likely to get funding. So they're now gearing funding towards people who have a plan to be more open and transparent and accessible with their research. So that I know there's some various guidelines now popping up in the US and in Canada, but that's just an example. I think the UK kind of led that one, but that's a benefit for authors. Yeah.
I just have another quick question for you guys. What do you think about video abstracts? This was, well, it's an idea that the author can make a short video, 2 minutes, explaining what the point of the paper is, maybe where they got the idea and something like that. I love this idea. We haven't really done it at my journal yet. We kind of talked about it a few years ago. I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it for my own papers, even going back to 10, 12, 13 years ago. I'd love to go back and comment on them 10 years on and just have a link to the video in the journal's website. When you pull up the URL for the specific article, it would be there. I really, really love this idea. But I don't know, in terms of just making it happen, or would it actually deliver any value beyond like vanity or something like I'd be curious to know your thoughts. Have you done this, or have you seen it, and is it valuable at all?
I'm Randy. I'm with the American Geophysical Union. We publish 20 journals. I'm responsible for managing 13 of those 20 journals in the Earth and Space Sciences. We do author surveys regularly, and video abstracts was one of the things that we thought was going to really draw people into it, but it was the lowest interest in the survey, so we decided to not move forward with it. We've done this particular survey a couple of years in a row, and it's been consistently the least.
So you're saying authors just don't want to do them? What's everybody else's experience, Rebecca?
Yeah, so I know at the Academy of Management last year, we had a session where we invited academics to come and talk about articles that they published with Emerald Journals. And we had a few people come in and they were really excited to sit down and do it. But I think when you do video abstracts and when you do things like layperson articles, or you're considering changing a title, or you should always be in consultation with the author and be talking about, well, what is our objective here? How are we going to push this out? Where is this going to go? Is it going to go, are we sending it to Vox for them to include in a video? Or are we going to use this just as a Twitter marketing tool? I think intention is important, and keeping the author looped in on what they're working with you on is important, and it's about striking that balance.
It's weird. Your comments are very interesting to me, the gentleman right here. To me, it feels like one of those things like getting people to use their credit cards to buy things online. I mean, people hated that when it was first presented to them. And it took a long time to make customers actually comfortable with that. But now we all do it, and we prefer it in many cases. Just knowing professors like I do, I'm just wondering if this will reach a tipping point, and then everybody will be into their video abstract. Because, I mean, we like to be heard. The worst thing you can do, I don't know, maybe this will be useful to you, to your editors, or to a professor. The worst thing you can do to them is ignore them. It's kind of funny to me. We hate that. But giving them a chance to just speak out and talk about why they did it, I don't know. I still have faith in this idea, but it doesn't surprise me that it wasn't popular, because it's new and it's different, and to me it's the kind of thing where when people become more familiar with it, I bet they'll be more willing to do it. That's my theory. We'll see.
Hi, I'm from University of Toronto Press Journals, and we just had one of our journals got the Scholarly and Research Communication Award for using video abstracts. And in submitting information for this award, we looked at downloads of articles, and we found direct correlation between the articles who had video abstracts as opposed to the ones who didn't. I mean, it's still in, early stages, but I would say anything that can contribute to your content being received in a different format, it's valuable. Whether it's through social media, drawing attention, anything that can distinguish your article from anything else that's published just in a print form or online, it can't hurt.
Now, when you do your video abstracts, is the audience for the video abstracts the other scholars, or are they the general public?
It is other scholars, but when we are working on social media promotions, we are trying to talk in a different language to actually rework the abstract language and reach the wider audience. And we've definitely seen more traction if that's accompanied by photos. It also goes along what we've been talking about, the titles, and attracting the wider audience with catchy quotes or anything that can draw, because in the end, for so many journals, you want to attract the media. You want them to notice your article and maybe tackle these topics from a scholarly point of view, not just the journalistic.
Yeah. All right.
Patty, it might be interesting if we were to go back and find our most cited articles in Management Decision and then invite those authors to come in and do a video abstract to see.
Yeah. So I know we've got a lot. It's 5 minutes past the break, and they've got coffee and tea and stuff out there. So let's continue the conversation when you get back. And I think we're breaking until 20 after, I think is what they're doing. So we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you.